this computer.
All right, thanks for inviting me. And Cindy's trying to get on and said she's still having some difficulty. But in addition to those reasons you cite for your dislike of the air shows, one of our focal points is the tremendous pollution that we see exhibited as an example in military air shows. And I hope to provide you with some information as we move forward here to expand on that. But a little background, I'm a native San Diegan, and I inadvertently got drafted during the Vietnam War into the United States Army, where I decided that I was a conscientious objector and have been in a group called Veterans for Peace for about 12 years now. I'm also a member of First UU Church in San Diego and a member of San Diego 350.org. And it became apparent to me when I was talking with some of my climate friends that they have an underappreciation of what the military's actual contribution to the climate crisis is. So I'm a part of a group called the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project, and I see several members here in support. Thank you for coming. And let's get right into it. I'm going to share a screen here. And Veterans for Peace is a group of United States veterans and international veterans in over 130 chapters dedicated to raising the awareness of the total cost of war. We do several other things: oppose militarization of law enforcement. We seek justice for veterans and victims of war. In short, we think that violence should be the last means of how humans resolve interpersonal conflict. And as part of Veterans for Peace, I'm in a subgroup called the Climate Crisis and Militarism Project. And we feel that we provide public education and an advocacy campaign of the impacts of militarism on the climate crisis. If you will, speaking about the military in today's environment is almost like talking about the elephant in the room, but we feel that this is important enough to our future, combined with the climate crisis, that we need to spread the word on this. And of course, it fits in nicely with UU's 6th and 7th principles, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. And the 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Now, these two individuals serve to inspire me to do what I do to be part of this group. On the left, we see a picture of Greta Thunberg exhorting us to act as if our house is on fire when she's talking about the severity of the climate crisis, because indeed it is. And then on the right, we contrast that with ex-President Dwight Eisenhower, who was the Supreme Allied Commander in World War II in Europe. And he reminded us about the threat of the military-industrial complex, saying that every gun that is made, every warship launched, every rocket fired signifies in the final sense a theft from those who hunger and are not fed, those who are cold and are not clothed. So we've got these two opposing forces here, and it became apparent to me that we should work to get the climate folks and the peace folks out of our silos to band together to talk about these twin existential threats. And we feel at Veterans for Peace that we're uniquely qualified to be able to connect the dots between these two critical issues. Now, I'm going to provide you with a lot of information which can be found on our website at veteransforpeace.org. I'll put it in the website in the chat afterwards. But the three key points are the U.S. military pollutes a lot. The U.S. military spends money a lot, and we can do something about it. Now, we've given this talk to about 170 different organizations throughout the country in the last 3.5 years. Social justice groups, church groups, peace groups, climate groups, political groups. And we've opened a lot of eyes as to how severe the problem is and what the military's contribution is. But in the words of Antonio Guterres of the United Nations, we're in a situation that's code red for humanity. And this was put out back in 2022, but they were talking about how emissions must peak by 2025 to avoid rising above the target temperature of 1.5 degrees centigrade. But we know that that's really kind of already been passed at times. In fact, the average daily temperature was reached in 2023 and 2024 above that target of 1.5 degrees centigrade. However, officially, they claim that it has to be an entire decade of averaging that. So, nonetheless, this is a warning that the key limit of the Paris Climate Agreement is closer than we would like. And according to the New York Times, of course, in looking back at 2023, this rather busy chart indicates that 2023 was the planet's warmest year on record. But wait, 2024 has come by, and we now see that 2024 was the warmest year on record. So we're in a critical situation as far as global warming and fossil fuel man-made contributions to it. Many scientists claim that the next 10 to 20 years are going to be super critical if we're going to get to zero carbon emissions and stabilize the planet. It seems that with the current political situation, this is even a taller order. So we need to redouble our efforts. And I know throughout the country, we're all experiencing our own different manifestations of how this is affecting us. In the United States, we see more intensified hurricanes, bigger forest fires, hotter temperatures, droughts, atmospheric rivers, low amounts of snowfall, later winters. And we see it ourselves. I live in San Diego, and one of the fears of people here is, you know, we talk about the climate change, but what really may affect people is when it's almost impossible to get homeowners insurance because of the fires. So as much as it affects, affects us in the global north, we know that the global south is most impacted by a warming world sooner. And we're already seeing crop failures with an influx of global refugees due to climate. And we expect to see the global economy reducing average global incomes by roughly a quarter by the year 2100. So we look at this situation, and the international community gets together annually for a meeting to assess the situation and strategize and to plan out. But it's seemingly, according to the New York Times, over the past year, the verdict on the climate progress is that there was none. Countries have essentially made no progress in cutting emissions and tackling global warming. So what does that put us? Why am I here talking to you about the military, about the US military? Climate groups are very active in local communities, doing the best they can to deal with their local issues. But we look at the US military, and it surprises many people to know that the US military is the world's single largest institutional consumer of petroleum products and also the single most prolific emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And when I talk to a climate activist about this, many of them are surprised to hear that. Uh, they can't understand why it can be such a huge contributor and they've not heard anything. Well, this really is by design from the United States government, going back to one of the first international climate meetings in Kyoto, Japan in 1997, where the US government lobbied successfully to remove language from that agreement so that in the final end, most military emissions were exempted from being accounted against a nation's reported amounts of greenhouse gases. And fast forward to the Paris agreements, the Paris Accords in I believe it was 2015, that military emissions are still not required, they're voluntary. So there's really no way of accurately assessing military emissions and what they contribute. So we depend on estimates, and those estimates put the military's footprint at around 5 to 6% of total global emissions. And as an example, jet fuel is the biggest culprit in this. And the B 52, which has been around almost as long as I've been alive, I think it's probably 60 years old now, but they're still in service. They consume as much fuel in an hour as the average car does in 7 years. So we see a growing awareness that militarism is the number one polluter and contributor of greenhouse gases in the world. In fact, if the US military was a country, it would rank as number 47 among all the countries of the world in greenhouse gas emissions. And that's just from calculating emissions from fuel usage. Think about that. One single organization polluting more than many entire mid-sized nations. And these are estimates since the military does not provide complete values for their emissions. This excludes emissions from electricity and food the military consumes, land use changes from military operations, contractors' emissions, foreign bases, or any other source. So this is a huge contributor to global emissions. Now, we've been doing this for about 3.5 years, and when the when the Russians invaded Ukraine, we felt that awareness of the climate crisis was being pushed off the front page of everybody's news feed. But it seems that on the contrary, the Russian invasion of Ukraine has brought a new awareness to the damage that war and preparation for war can cause to the environment. It's estimated that during the first months of first 18 months of that conflict, 150 million tons of CO2 was generated into the environment. And we look at what happens after any type of military conflict, and we're going to see another 36% increase due to future reconstruction due to the carbon footprint of concrete and other building materials. And we see that the greenhouse gases continue to rise. We see politicians continue to talk. We see very little action on stopping the war. So far, you can see the casualties, displaced people, military, civilians. The war has displaced over 11 million people. Civilian infrastructure has been destroyed. Ukraine's economy has been devastated, and reduced food and energy security is apparent in many countries. They estimate that the war has caused over $56 billion in damage to the environment. There's been widespread chemical contamination of air, water, and soil, landmines, unexploded ordnance, radioactive contamination, shelling, wildfires, devastation, and pollution, dangers to nuclear power plants and dams. The list goes on. And, training for war does the same type of thing. I live in San Diego, and we raised our two children in a suburb of San Diego near the Miramar Air Base. And there's a fenced off portion of that land that's labeled no trespassing, unexploded ordnance. Well, it seems that back during World War II, that area was a gunnery range for the military. And even though this land is prime location for housing in the center of San Diego, it's off limits because the military has not been able to successfully cleanse the area of unexploded ordnance. So the threats exist. We still hear about Agent Orange from the Vietnam era causing genetic disorders in newborn babies in Vietnam 60 years after its application. And again, in Gaza, we see that the Gaza Strip, since that outbreak of conflict and hot war has happened, the Gaza Strip is nearly uninhabitable. Half of Gaza's trees have been destroyed. 40% of its agricultural land is unusable. And it's estimated that there are 37 million tons of toxic waste that's contaminated the soil and water. So we see that massive destruction as a result of the war, with an ongoing legacy of lingering contamination. And the rebuilding process is going to simply add to that. The damage and emissions are apparent. We're seeing an increased arms race. So when there's increased military spending, we see increased military emissions. With active wars, there's a disproportionate effort to not talk about dealing with the climate crisis. It seems to take a back seat. And then again, we're going to have the additional carbon footprint to rebuild after the war. And this is merely a photograph from one of the most recent international climate meetings. A lot of young people, a lot of third world people, a lot of global south people. Climate change is recognized as a global problem, but most of the global pollution comes from the global north, the industrialized nations. So, in short, there is no such thing as a green war. War in preparation for war is toxic. The sources of military greenhouse gas emissions, which are hard to accurately account for, are many. You can see from the slide, it goes from production of weapons, R&D for weapons, training, weapons testing, conventional wars, cyber wars, low intensity conflicts, weapons sales and arms races, military contractors. And there's the biggest one I didn't put up there is actually nuclear arms and nuclear war. Even the mining for nuclear weapons is very carbon intensive. And so what's really driving the US's contribution to this? One of the major things is the fact that the US still maintains over 750 bases in over 80 countries. There are troops throughout the world. The bases range in size from really small lily pads, if you will, that pre-position weaponry and supplies to huge complexes that include their own housing, hospitals, bowling alleys, golf courses, and power plants. Think of the supply lines and logistical issues involved in the fossil fuels used to maintain and support this throughout the years. And if we look back in history, back in 1907, President Theodore Roosevelt's Great White Fleet was a force of 16 battleships that were painted sparkling white. They were coal powered, but they steamed out of Virginia to begin a 14-month circumnavigation of the globe to demonstrate to the world America's naval power. So this demanded that there be fuel sources or coaling stations located throughout the globe that the US could rely on and could maintain. And as the Navy transitioned to oil powered rather than coal powered, those were simply displaced and they've been incorporated into part of the many bases that the US maintains throughout the globe. So we've seen the US is a huge polluter. It doesn't account for its pollution. It's not transparent in its reporting in a willful manner. How does it spend the billions and billions of dollars that it draws from our tax payments? Well, the military budget is part of what's called the discretionary budget. And each year, the Pentagon sends a number to the president, and it seems that the president, whether it be a Republican or a Democrat, increases that number, and then it goes to Congress, and Congress increases that number even further so that we have something that's approaching $1 trillion a year as a Pentagon budget. I think it's somewhere around 885 billion for the Pentagon right now, but that doesn't include everything that's militarized. We have to also consider things like nuclear weapons. You think that they'd be in the military budget, but they're actually over in the energy department. Don't forget Homeland Security, border enforcement, intelligence agencies, veterans benefits, and of course the massive annual interest payment that's due on the military's portion of the national debt. If you put that all together, that's nearly $1.25 trillion a year. And the sad fact is the military has failed all 7 of its audits. So not only does it spend a lot of money it can't account for how it spends that money accurately. A good portion of that money goes to military contractors. These are what we call the big five military contractors: Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, General Dynamics, Northrop Grumman. And they enjoy billions and billions of dollars of taxpayers' money to build armaments and military support. And yet we see their CEOs are averaging $20 million apiece annually. So they're making money off the war machine. And it's simply, in San Diego, we have a big military presence, and we hear all the time about the military members themselves and their families having to go on food stamps because they aren't paid enough. So the money is not going to the service people. The money is going to contractors and others. And, this is simply a matter of priorities. As Martin Luther King stated, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. So the US, for example, spends 20 times more on the military than it does on climate issues, 20 times more on border protection than it does on climate. It's estimated that there are going to be 200 million climate refugees by 2050. And yet what we're doing here is clamping down on immigration. So what would you rather do with our tax dollars? I mean, this is a topic worth discussing. Do we want it to go to military budgets and military contractors where a single jet can cost 80 to $100 million? Or should we divert some of that money to social programs that would have a higher benefit for society, such as healthcare, childcare, or climate programs? Now, within our group, we stay current as to what the military's plans are, because no matter what the current defense secretary says, I hear he is poo-pooing any climate talk within the military now, because those are some bad words. But the military is highly aware of climate change and how it's going to affect their bases, how sea level rise is going to affect their naval warships, and how climate change is going to drive famines and crop failures internationally, and what's going to happen to all those climate refugees. The military sees climate as a threat multiplier. But as far as what they're doing to mitigate their carbon footprint, each of the services has produced glossy climate strategy outlines and plans to reach, for example, net zero by 2050. But reducing the military's carbon footprint goes way beyond solar panels on soldiers' backpacks, for example, and experimental biodiesel for naval vessels. Many of the military's weapons platforms, if you accept that term, or programs, are built upon fossil fuel consumption. And until there's some type of viable alternative for that, they are on a path to continue to be the most prolific emitter of greenhouse gases in the world. And as a comparative, the US spends more on its Pentagon budget than do the next 10 countries combined, the next 10 countries. So it's estimated by many reputable groups who have produced well thought out proposals with specific targets that can reduce Pentagon spending significantly without affecting the so-called security of the United States. And the American Friends Service Committee actually did a recent poll wherein they identified the fact that over half of the US adults in this survey supported cutting the Pentagon's budget and diverting those funds to other more social beneficial programs. And we've heard about it. We've heard about converting the war economy to create good jobs for a peaceful future. In fact, Brown University did a recent study about the investment in a culture's infrastructure on what would give us the best return on investment. And as this chart indicates, defense is really one of the lowest. In fact, on this chart is the lowest return on investment for jobs. We see things like education and healthcare giving a bigger return to society than does putting money directly into the defense budget. So we've got a big entity in our society that's a major polluter and eats up a bunch of our taxes. What can we do about it? It seems that, this is the elephant in the room and we can't get our hands around it. What do we do? Well, in San Diego, we thought that maybe if we just isolated one factor of the military to focus on, we could change people's minds. So about 8 years ago, we started protesting the Blue Angels annual visit to San Diego. But we did it on the basis of its glorification of violence, its appeal to youngsters. In fact, we sent 2 of our members onto the military base, and they made a short film called The Disneyland of War. The Disneyland of War. What does that bring up? Well, we actually had video of kids as young as 8 years old aiming submachine guns or automatic weapons at other people with uniformed service people directing them. Well, our members felt satisfied with what we were saying, but we didn't get much response from the community. And in fact, when we look at it, each Blue Angels plane uses approximately 7,000 gallons of jet fuel per hour. And we thought, well, maybe we should just focus on the pollution. Maybe we should just focus on the carbon footprint of military spending in our community and what the Blue Angels represent. And so we changed our focus to only focus on that pollution. And last year, we had over 24 local climate, peace, social justice, faith, and political groups join us in our protest against the military air show. But beyond that, it opened up a lot of people to the conversation of the military's influence and contribution to the climate crisis. Many climate activists, the phrase they would say is, I never knew that. I never realized that. But when they could hear the roar of the jets and see the pollution, it was something that's tactile and visible that they experienced, and they could start talking about and listening about the military's contribution. So we see a varying number of groups, including our group, the Climate Justice Committee at First UU in San Diego. So last year we decided to go national with this, and we saw 9 organized protests against air shows. So we thought, well, this is starting to catch on. As people become more aware of how big an influence this is, we can't ignore it anymore. And together we can do something about it. This year, we're going to take this a step further. We're going to put together a bus tour to support local protests for air shows and conduct educational events at local universities, colleges, and churches along the path to get more people involved in this. This picture was actually taken last year at the Navy's Annapolis graduation, where the Blue Angels flew over Annapolis, Maryland. And we had a lot of people stop and talk to us. So this year we're going to start in California, in San Diego, and go up the state. We're in the planning stages now. Phase 2 will be the first part of next year, and will be along the southern East Coast, and even expand that. So this brings me to a topic. What could UUJEC do? That should be, what can UUJEC do to help us? Well, we see this as a grassroots movement, and we see this as something that might fit nicely into addressing local climate justice or local social justice groups within congregations. So we would ask, can you help us identify places where we can deliver this talk? Can you help us identify active groups? Would you want to help us planning for this bus tour, or would you like to help us publicize where we have active protests? You could also go to our website, where we have a variety of resources that you can do, including protesting an air show, schedule a presentation. We have a number of downloadable resources, including an informative trifold that's really handy at tabling events or Earth Day activities, bumper stickers, and others. We want people to talk about this topic, and we're willing to help educate people about the topic. We know that these two issues are existential threats, and we know that we are stronger together. And we believe it's time that we realign our priorities so that it benefits people and not corporate welfare and the war machine. Please check out our website for resources, and I'll now open it up for questions and discussion.
Note everybody's muted except for Gary.
You can unmute. Gary, I've got a question for you. Gary?
Sure.
I'm located in Atlanta,
Okay.
and our UU church has a green team meeting tomorrow. And I was going to bring this up because we may be interested in helping out on this on the East Coast, but I've got to check it out with the chairperson. I don't know if you're familiar with the thing that UU did regarding I can't think of the name of it. It's like a big gathering. Every church did it regarding what they could do to help the environment. Um, and we're kind of involved in that right now. But what you're going to do looks like a pretty good deal that we might be able to do. I think we've been looking for something to branch out from the church a little bit. Um, so I guess
Barry,
it's
that would be fantastic. We are already aligned with 350.org nationally, and we're
okay.
looking to also align with other climate groups as well as other peace groups like Code Pink and World Beyond War
Mhm.
to help educate people about this specific topic. And your green team would be an ideal situation for us to get together and do a presentation. We have about 6 to 8 people who do this presentation and are well versed in it and can help. And I'd have to check my schedule. I don't know if Atlanta itself has an air show, but there are a lot in the South, and we could sure use your help.
I
I
would think
put my
Warner Robins might have it, but we don't really have any big military bases. Tyler Perry pretty much bought up the Army base, and he's using it for movies.
well, that's a good use of it, much better
Yeah.
than guns.
Yeah.
Well, Barry, I put my email in the chat, or
Okay.
you could reach out to Terry or Cindy, and they know how to reach me as well. That's exactly what we want. And what we see when we do this talk is that if you're attending this talk and you've stayed to the end and you have an interest in this, most people belong to more than one group.
Yes.
And other groups can benefit from this talk. Pollution and money. I mean, those are pretty hot topics for what's going on in today's world. We've got a 9-year-old grandson, and that's really what drives me to do this. We've got to do a better
Yeah.
job leaving this place than what we've been doing. And we can't keep our heads in the sand and ignore the big elephant in the room anymore. It's
I
our
agree.
right to see how our tax dollars are spent, and it's our right to demand cleaner air.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, Andy, can you unmute and ask your question?
Sure. I'd like to just say I'm in my name is Andy Puckrick. I'm in Concord, Mass, outside of Boston, and we're our neighborhood. We have Anscombe Air Force Base, and for many years we've had air shows. I used to enjoy those fighter jets streaming over my house. Didn't bother me. I'm an Air Force brat, but one of the I haven't seen any shows recently at Hanscom, but I certainly think it's a possible target for some protests. And also, we're fighting a big an expansion of Hanscom Air Force Base for the private jets, corporate jets that are just as bad as the damn fighter planes in terms of
Yeah.
emissions. And the problem we're having is if those corporate jets hangars expand, and this is covering New England, uh, that means that it's going to be a cookie cutter recipe for the rest of the country. And these are mostly corporate people use these jets to, like, just for joyriding, doing vacations and things like that. So I don't want to get into that, but I'm not sure where the audience is, if we're national or global or whatever, but uh, certainly we should think about targeting air, I'm trying to think of like find bases where we still have these air shows, and Hanscom might be a candidate. Thank you.
Okay, and also one other note that I did not mention, but is a major factor, especially if you're adjacent to a military airbase or even a commercial airport, as far as that's concerned, is the use of PFAS, PFAS, forever chemicals. They've been in the news a lot lately because of the danger that they pose to us. It's something that is highly prevalent in the firefighting foam that the military uses to put out fires from jet airplanes. And they do practice runs of it, and they typically just let it run off and go into the ground. And it seeps into the groundwater or it accumulates in fish. And especially in Maine and other northeastern regions, there's really an uproar over this because it's contaminated food supplies.
Okay,
Lucy,
Lou. Yeah.
Do you have in advance the list of where the air shows will be? It will take some time to organize, and it would be really helpful to know ahead of time where they would be.
right. Well, Peter, I see where Peter has put the schedule into the chat right now.
Oh, great.
And Lucy, if you would email me, where do you live?
Salem, Oregon.
All right, Salem. That's been a hotbed this past year. Especially there was one in McMinnville. We know Seattle has something going on in Portland as well. So email me and I'll get together with you directly.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Gary.
Hi, one more Gary. This one, I'm from Denver, Colorado area. This is so important, what you, Gary, the other Gary, Butterfield are doing in this group, to be the only place I see where we look at, we're all caught up in electric cars and carbon footprints of what's in your potato, all that stuff, carbon footprint. And this is the only place where we're having a conversation is what is the carbon footprint of a 2,000-pound bomb or 80, 90,000 of them dropped on Gaza? So it's just a personal frustration for me. I live in a UU bubble where people are all paying attention to carbon footprint of daily activity. But there is absolutely, I'm just kind of echoing what you said, Butterfield, that for some reason we've got climate people and all caught up in good stuff, and hardly any anti-war activists anywhere anymore. And I don't understand how you can be climate sensitive and not be anti-war. I just don't understand it. But your organization and things we can do together can help break that. And I'm pleased that it looks like you've had some communication with the people in Albuquerque who are working on they're opposing a military air event in about a month. And so I'm glad that there's some connections going on there. Hope those guys feed into this. And okay, I'm all through talking, but thanks so much for doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you, Gary. And I did respond to that. Thank you for that email introducing me to the folks in Albuquerque. I would like to comment that 350.org took a while to come around, but we've got a really good relationship with them overall right now. And in fact, last year they put out a petition that we attempted to deliver to the Secretary of the Navy and Secretary of the Air Force, calling for an end to air shows. And we had over 5,600 signatures. So we know that when people pay attention to this topic, they can get energized. And we want to provide enough education to energize them into action. And this is how change happens. What would be the next step with UU? Or is there anything that UU might do to be able to help us to provide an opportunity for local congregations to become aware of this? I know that your group, we're one of 3 discussions. We had David Delk last month, and you've got Nick Buxton coming up next month from the Transnational Institute. That'll be a real interesting one as well. But, this is something that local congregations can do something about. And, everybody's looking for something to do to take action. And this is good on so many fronts, and it broadens the conversation that when you're aware of these issues, you can talk to climate people about it. You're not taking anything away from what they're doing already, but you're saying, here's another part to it. This is something. The air show is just one example of it, but it's highly visible. And just think about it. If the military said, we're curtailing these air shows because of pollution, and I know that that's a tall order under the Trump administration, but still, time is ticking, folks. So if the military were to recognize that, because this doesn't affect operational readiness, and by goodness, over 10% of the pilots who've flown in these stunt airplanes have died since they originated in 1953. But if the military were to say, we're curtailing these because of the pollution, think of how many people that might wake up to the fact that climate change is real and we have to do something about it.
And then they'd get fired
I
if they
know, I
said
know.
that.
It's not the rosiest of times, but
No.
we can't
But
give up.
but we can point it out. Janet, do you want to unmute yourself? Good.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, I can't, my video's messed up, folks. But anyway, thank you, Gary, again for another great presentation. I wanted to respond to something that Rebecca said. I have been working on this climate crisis and militarism group for years now too. The petition was attempted to be delivered by both the national staffer at 350 US, Taylor Hams Smith is her name, and one of the members of the Veterans for Peace Board, who is also an active member on the steering committee of Climate Crisis and Militarism Group, Ellen Barfield. They went to deliver the petition, which was directed at both the Secretary of the Navy and the Secretary of the Air Force. They had received it, of course, in those offices already electronically, but they wanted to deliver the paper signatures, and they were refused, which is shocking. We pay their salaries. Supposedly, they are there to serve and protect us Americans. And they were too scared to take our pieces of paper. So that petition was closed in November, but we will have another coming up for sure. And we plan to get many, many more signatures. And Rebecca, I didn't understand your first question. Maybe I could share a video, or could you maybe explain your first
Yes,
question?
when he was asking what we could do, what UUs could do, I was thinking that I do a monthly thing on climate and the environment at our church, and so I'd be glad to, once this goes up on the web, share that, maybe even have him come speak, but our group is so small, I'm not sure it'd be worth the time, but I would love to share what you've done today. Thank you.
You get a group together, we will address your group.
Thank you. Thank you. I've got your email, so.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Gary, one thing I would like to see is a brochure we can put at our booth for GA. And I would
Okay.
assume that some of the UU Climate Coalition, which includes the Animal Ministry and the Women's Group and UU Ministry for the Earth and UUs for Social Justice, all these people might want one at their booth. And
Okay.
I will share that with them if I have something.
I will hit you up. Dee Dee,
Okay. Yeah,
good to see you.
good.
Right. Great presentation, Gary. Thanks. Actually, someone else answered my question, so I'll pass.
Can we get your bumper stickers from your website?
Yes.
Because that's
Yes.
something we could get going early too.
Okay. I'll communicate with Terry and I'll send you guys some stuff.
Good. That'd be great. Those bumper stickers and buttons buttons go really well.
Oh, okay. We have some stickers too.
Yeah. But they would take buttons home and wear them to the UU on Sundays. So that would be a good way to spread the message. Can't be very many words, but
Okay, well, we'll put something together.
good. Okay. Do we have any more questions? Well, I think we've gotten a really clear message. Uh, Carry this forward. Uh, Thank you, Gary. Is it okay if we call this an evening and move on then?
Sure.
Are you
Thank
ready?
you all.
Oh, Andy has a question.
Sorry to interject. I was hoping that you might look at the chat and answer some questions there, maybe send a newsletter out or results or whatever. I've been throwing some in, but other people have been asking questions. So anyway,
Okay.
I'm interested in, obviously, I agree with you. Military air shows are bad. War is horrible. I'm thinking of, Kuwait, burning all the oil wells, but uh, there's also commercial airports. There's the private jets. And I don't know. I don't mean to dilute your focus, but I'm glad you're I'm glad you're talking about the environment. I haven't heard much with the current administration. That today they're trying to gut the EPA. So, uh, we have to be vigilant.
Well,
Indeed. They want to gut everything.
what they're trying to do is figure out how to keep us from knowing what's going on. They're trying to stop information collection and distribution. So they aren't going to help us, but we can help ourselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you all for your attention.
Okay, I'm going to share screen.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary.
Good to see you, Jane.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see. This can be the closing screen. Thank you very much, everybody.